That is scary.
Starting in 52 seconds, says that.
Oh, okay, so I can be live.
And now it has just popped up as I can press play.
Okay.
Make a gesture so I can see the lag.
You need to keep gesturing. Okay, good speed.
I didn't see the lag. Hey, there it is.
Okay.
Not bad. You're commenting as Marty's wheeler.
Yep. I don't think you can join this. What?
Oh, another one there.
Oh, is it really delayed? It could be.
Clap. First joiner. Or was it really delayed?
Really delayed.
Clap.
Oh, okay, good.
Actually good.
It's just like you don't keep looking at you.
Oh, look at me.
I'm gonna have to stay behind the camera. Thanks for joining. We'll just wait for a few more. We're just making sure everything technically is working properly. That's good. I can't see what's going on, so I'm just relying on my husband. He's got the computer, so he's just monitoring.
I could spin it around for you.
So he'll let me know when we're good to go.
I can hear and see you well.
Excellent. There is a big delay, so if it seems like I'm responding to things really late, it's how much? 20 seconds maybe?
15 maybe, I don't know, 10, 15.
Yeah. What do you need?
How do I zoom out so I can see more comments in it? Function, command, control, command. Minus.
Maybe function command minus.
Command. Yeah. That's so helpful.
Really? Margin?
Die.
No, we have to have. We have to have.
Must be. Yep, 2 pass.
Should we get started?
Yeah.
Right. We'll get started. Hello, welcome to our first ever online workshop. I think it's actually our very first actual workshop. My name's Marty. I'm the farmer behind Quite Contrary Flower Farm, and I'll be running through this workshop with you today. So what we're going to cover today is I'm going to talk a little bit about my history with dahlias, then I'll go through my checklist of tools that I like to use when dividing the dahlia clumps. We'll go through the anatomy of a tuber because that really helps when you're looking at the clump to know what's important and what isn't as important. And then I'm going to do at least 2 dividing examples for you. So one's going to be really simple to show you the steps in a really clear way. And then I'm going to show you what I do when I have a monster clump and I don't know where to start. And I've got one that's been in the ground for at least 2 years, so it's looking very tangled. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the comments. And my husband is going to read them out as we go along. Is that okay?
While you're going.
Yeah, as we go along, if he thinks it's relevant. Otherwise, we'll catch up on any questions that we miss at the end. That way?
Sure.
Okay, and let me know if you can't hear or see at any time, pop it in the comments, and then we'll try and fix it. So who am I? Quite Contrary Flower Farm. We are a regenerative farm. We're on the edge of West Gippsland, which is about an hour east of Melbourne. I've been growing dahlias for at least 6 seasons now, and I've grown them about every which way that you can grow them. So we've done pots, we've done in the field, 2 different locations in the field. We've done really wet years, we've done really dry years, and we've done everything from seeds to tubers as you'd expect, and cuttings. So we've done a lot of dahlias a lot of different ways. The shameless plug is that our next tuber sale is coming up within the next 2 weeks. If you want to know the exact date and time, you do have to jump on our mailing list, and you can get there by going to our website. You can find those links on all of our socials at QC Flower Farm. So the first thing we'll go through is our dividing tools. I did read out a checklist for this. This is available on the website if you want to see it or download it. It's a free download. So pop on over there and you can get a copy if that's helpful. So the things that I mostly want are really sharp secateurs. I use Velcros. I used to use really cheap secateurs because I thought they would get just damaged. We don't always wash our clumps, and so the dirt in the secateurs isn't always a good thing. And then I started using my really sharp Velcros and I never went back. So make sure you've got a really good pair, especially if you're going to be doing lots and lots of tubers. Another thing that can be helpful is pointy nose snips. These ones are pretty rough looking. They're just cheapies, but they can help you get into the sharp, not the sharp places, into the really hard to reach places to make really fine cuts. So always good to have on hand. The next thing that you might not expect, but that we do use pretty often, is a chisel and a hammer. I only use the one size. I know some people recommend a few different sizes, but I find one is enough. Sometimes if the clump is a real monster, you really just have to get it split in half before you do anything else, and that's where the chisel and the hammer come in handy. I don't know that we'll have to use them today, but we've got them nearby just in case. The next thing is loppers. These, again, can help you give a bit of a precision cut through a big clump, which is more useful sometimes than the chisel. Sometimes the chisel can be a little bit unwieldy and you might damage a tuber that you otherwise wouldn't want to damage. These can help. Also, if you have a bit of stem that is particularly big and particularly hard, loppers are going to be your best friend to get through there, because these just aren't really designed for going through anything big or woody. The other thing I like to keep nearby is a knife. Again, pretty sharp, pretty pointy, and it just lets you navigate through those clumps in a way that sometimes the secateurs doesn't. So handy to have on hand. I always keep a tool sharpener nearby. Again, sharp tools are going to be your best friends, because if the tuber rips, you can damage the eye. I use, again, I'm not sponsored by Felco, but I just really like their products. I now have a Felco sharpener. We did get a big discount in my horticulture class on these, but it is amazing, and it was invaluable when we were pruning our roses, so I do highly recommend it. Otherwise, I used to have just a little sharpener from Bryset, which is a really affordable option that you'll probably find at most garden centres. So keep an eye out for something like that. You'll want a permanent marker or a pencil so that you can label the tubers as you're going. You can write directly on them or write on whatever crate or whatever storage you've decided that you're going to do. Disinfectant is a really big one, and it's really important if you don't want to risk spreading gall or virus between your different tuber clumps. So we use a 70%, at least 70% alcohol, which is good because you don't have to let it soak, and it just has to dry. So you can dip your tool, and then you're good to go once it's dried off, which will happen. You can see I've got 2 pairs of secateurs. I work in rotation, so one's dipped and drying while I'm working with the other one. You can also use a 10% bleach solution. It's obviously cheap and affordable, but it does do a bit more wear on your tools, which isn't as good, and the tool does need to sit in the bleach for at least 6 minutes, and more ideally 30 minutes to get that really good disinfectant, so that can be a bit slower. A cloth or a brush pan to clean up your surface as you're working if you've got little bits and pieces lying around, and then a compost or other bin to put all of your waste into, because no matter how good you are at dividing, you are going to end up with bits of tuber everywhere that you don't want to keep. So put it straight in the compost if there's no problems, or into the garbage if you think you might have an issue with gall. So that's the tool checklist. Again, you can find that on the website if you think that would be helpful. Okay, the anatomy of a tuber. So we might have to bring the camera in a little bit. Not just yet. Sorry, husband. So we all know tubers are funny little potato-looking things. Unlike a potato, you really need your tubers to be put together in specific ways to get the best out of them. So we have, I'll do a clump. I'll do a tuber first. This one's a really nice little tuber because it has all the parts really neatly put together. So you can probably come in now. So here we have the end of the tuber. So this is where the tail would come from. I've already divided this one and neatened it up, so I've cut that off. And we have the little roots that I usually remove most of those as well. We have the firm body of the tuber, the neck of the tuber, which is quite distinct on this one, and then the crown, which is where the eye comes from. So the neck, all the neck does is it is the bridge between the crown, where you get your eye, and the body of the tuber. It's really important that the neck is always complete, or else we're not going to be able to get the energy into that eye to get a good viable plant. If you're ever in doubt which way is which, look for the bit of stem. The crown will always be attached to the stem, and the tail is always going to be at the other end, and the neck is somewhere in the middle. Not all tubers are going to be as neat as this one. I'll show you this tuber. Sorry.
It's a bit of light.
Okay. This tuber is obviously less neck. It's not a terrible one, but less neck, less crown. But you can see on it, it did have an eye. You can see on this one, the eye is actually at the end here. So this is where the stem was, this is where the eye is. It's just not as obvious as when you get a really neat looking tuber. So they can take a little bit of time to wrap your head around, but it just takes a little bit of practice, and the more familiar you get with your varieties, the easier of a time you're going to have of it. And then some of them, just because I thought it would be easier, again, a bit of a funny shaped one. So we've got our tail would have been here, we've got our body, our neck connects to the crown, and this one's got a really clear eye. It's already shooting, so that little bit of purple. So that's basically it. The most important things are that it has an eye. If you don't have an eye on your tuber, you will not get a plant. Tubers can produce roots without having eyes, so it can trick you into thinking that it's going to be viable, but no eye, no plant. And the other important thing to know is that not every tuber in your clump is going to have an eye. Any questions yet? So that's a basic tuber. Now I'll show you in more of a clump how that can look, because it can look a little bit different. So, what do you look at this one? I chose this clump because the eyes are really easy to see already. They're already shooting, and it's a little bit busy. So you can see we've got our tails still connected. We've got our tuber body, and then the neck connects to the crown, which is where we get our eyes, and the crown connects to the stem. If you have something like this one here, where you have tubers coming off another tuber, these are not going to grow. These are called vestigial tubers. It's just an extra bit of root that has decided to have a go at being a tuber. They're also sometimes called pups, but without the bit of crown, without that old bit of stem, no eyes, it's not going to grow. So you can always just chop those off and chuck them straight in bin or in the compost. I'll show you one last thing that you'll have heard people talk about is what's called a mother tuber. So the mother tuber is the tuber that we planted last season that has produced the clump that we have now. So here you can see we've got a few different tubers, and the mother is this one. It's not always super obvious, but the mother tuber will often have a slightly thicker skin or a coarser texture. If it was a wet year last year, you might still be able to see those old lenticels, which are the little bumpy growths like these. Oh, that's not one. Like these, which appear in wet times. But the thing that I look for and that I find most helpful when spotting the mother tuber is because I cut the tails off of everything, the mother tubers have a tendency to sprout lots of roots around that flat surface. So where a 1-year tuber will almost always have just a single nice neat tail, like this one here, that mother tuber is a bit rattier and it's got that flat surface in there. The other thing is that they often will be connected in a weird way to the clump. So this one, you can see that was the old bit of crown. It's not connecting as neatly to anything else. So that can be a handy way to try and spot those. If you can't spot the mother tuber, it's not a huge deal. The reason we don't keep them is because they're less reliable than the new tubers. They have a tendency to rot really easily and they can be less vigorous or more prone to virus than a new tuber if they're carrying a really high viral load. So that's why we always discard the mother tuber just straight off. The other reason I like to do it, as you'll see on some of our later clump dividing, is I like to get the mother tuber out of the way straight up front because it helps give me a clearer path for dividing all of my tubers. So that's about it. If you've got any questions about any of the anatomy, let me know and I can go into it in more depth. So we'll get into our first division, which is going to be this really neat little tuber that I showed you first. Okay. Oh, I think we're just going to reset slightly so that we can get a better angle for you. I should keep those. Okay. Okay. This is our clump. This one is Cafe au lait. Everybody knows she's my favourite. And one of the main things I like about her is that for us, she always makes these really beautiful clumps that are super easy and quick to divide. I only ever assume that I'm going to get maybe 4 tubers from a clump if I'm trying to make estimates. So everything on top of that is always a bonus. So that's the first thing, probably in the steps of when I'm making my plan, is I just reassure myself I'm going for 4. The next thing that I do is I take a moment to actually look at the clump and figure out where the eyes are. So on this one, I can see really easily that I have an eye here, which is the little swollen bit of growth. Again, body, neck, crown, eye, old stem. I can see there's one over here, and that might even be it on this clump, but there's a really good chance that this one will make an eye, and actually this little one here has an eye as well. So
can those pups still provide energy? Can we keep them attached?
No, it's not worth it. The thing with tubers is that they only need to be really small and you're still going to get a full-size plant. So anything bigger than, I think they say AAA size battery, but I like a AA size battery myself. But that's how small it can be and still make a viable plant. There's some speculation that if you plant a really big tuber that you're actually going to get a less resilient plant because it will draw from the tuber for a longer period of time before it makes its own root system, which then can slow it down long term.
And what happens if you accidentally damage the eye?
If you accidentally damage the eye, if you just accidentally knock it off, don't cut it off. If you separate it, you're going to be in trouble. But if you do knock it off, don't worry too much. There's a really good chance that it's going to sprout again from the eye. When we take cuttings, we can cut the whole eye off, basically, and then we'll get 2 or 3 new shoots coming up from that spot. So don't worry if you damage the eye a little bit. Obviously, try and avoid it, but it's not, it's not something that you should be stressed about unduly. Okay, so this clump. If you ever feel overwhelmed by a clump, I find it really helpful to remove all the extras first. So what I say when I mean that is if you go along and you take out all of the tails, and the mother tuber, which I'm going to remove right now. You can twist that off because I'm not too worried about damaging it, because I know it's going straight in the compost.
Don't drop your stuff too hard.
Oh, sorry. Okay. All of a sudden, it's looking a little bit less overwhelming. So the next thing I do is I always take off more of the stem because it can get in the way of making really clear cuts. The biggest tip that I can give for a beginner and that I found really useful is always cut through the stem. The reason why I say that is because if you are always cutting through the stem, you're not going to do something like we see so many beginner dahlia growers do and cut through the neck and then basically ruin your tuber. They're not a potato, you really do need that eye. So in saying that, in this clump, I'd keep it really simple and I would go through the middle into two. I know this one's probably got an eye, so I can do that one again. And this one is a little bit weirder because we have this one off the back. So I'm going to cut through there. And then I'm going to go a little bit neater. Get that out of the way. And is that an eye? Yeah, I can see an eye just here. So I would cut through there as well. And then I would leave it alone. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There was one I don't 100% know that it had an eye. So depending on whether or not how certain you want to be about that everything that you have has an eye, you can keep it or toss it. It's not going to do any harm if you leave it to see if it develops an eye in a little bit. So that's what you do when you have a really simple tuber. And if you're like me, you've watched a heap of videos when you've been stressed about what you're going to look at for your dahlia clumps, and every single video that you have looked at has been exactly like that one. But I find that the clumps that give me that really big sense of overwhelm, they don't look like that. They look like, and I'll show you, but I think there's a question.
There's another one.
Yeah.
Well, they keep flowering if you never lift and divide. Does the flower size diminish?
So you'll want to lift and divide at a minimum every 2 to 3 years. It can diminish, and also they can weaken over time or crowd themselves out. But you don't have to do it every year. In Australia, in most places, our soil stays warm enough that they're not going to freeze, which is the big problem that they have in America. That means they have to lift every year. We have quite a clay soil, so I feel safer lifting all of our clumps, and obviously do tuber sales. But if you have reasonable drainage and it's not going to be a super wet year like the last 2 that we've had, then you can just leave them in the ground for a couple of years. And also, you don't have to divide like this. An old gardener that I know used to lift up his clumps, again, every 2 to 3 years, and there was no way he was bringing them into his shed. He would just take a shovel, go into quarters, throw one back in the ground, and then keep going. So you don't have to be as precise if you're not trying to just multiply your stock as much as you can. Okay, should we do... Alright. This is the big monster clump. And I'm a little bit scared to do this one in front of you because I obviously haven't practiced. So we're just going to see how we go. So this one has been in Mum's garden. It is Elmer Elizabeth. Don't worry, this one isn't going in the tuber sale. This one is staying just with me. So anything that I do to it, don't stress. You can see in this one, because it has been in the ground for a few years, we've got different stems, and you can also see the older tubers fairly clearly because they've got these giant lenticels hanging off the side. People worry about lenticels and think maybe it's gall. It's not. Gall almost always will appear on the crown. Nematodes can affect the tails, but that's a whole other thing. If you just have these bumpies and you know it's been a wet year, it's just a lenticel. All it does is push the gas backwards and forwards and helps the tubers to breathe. Question?
Is it too late to lift and divide now if I've left them in over winter and past 2 years?
No, it's not too late. It's not too late. A lot of people won't lift until the spring when they know that they're going to have shoots and eyes that are really easy to see. The ground can be an amazing storage medium, and then you don't have to stuff around with like what we have here, all of your crates and all of the room that you need to be able to store your tubers. So you can leave them in the ground, you can lift, you can divide, you can plant again all in one day. Just do what suits you. Okay, here we go. We're going to do it. So again, first thing is I'm going to get rid of these old stems, so then I have better access. This clump as well has not been sitting in the shed with everything else. It has just been left outside the greenhouse. That's one of the beauties of leaving everything in a clump, is they can be more robust than once you've divided into individual tubers. Spring is a perfect time to divide if you're a beginner, because you're better off if you can see the eyes. We have to start dividing basically from when we dig up, ideally sort of Queen's birthday weekend, just because we have so many and I'm only one person. Okay, and we're going to use the chisel, maybe. What you'll often find is if you plant a tuber that has more than one eye, you'll get more than one stalk, and then that will form itself into its own little mini clumps. If it's only been growing for 1 year, sometimes what you can do is take your hands and sort of pull them apart, but I don't think we're going to get that luxury here. So I think I'm going to chisel it, which... Okay, this is going to be loud, so maybe turn your volume down for a second. Oh dear. Okay. Here we go. I'm going to go through the big boy. These tubers have grown in amongst each other as well, so they're actually holding on.
Has it started sprouting halfway down?
Has it? No, they're weeds. They're just weeds. Again, it was outside. It was sitting in its own dirt for a little bit. But I had to make way for Mum's delphiniums, so they got taken out. Now, pretty sure this is another tuber here, so I'll just clean that. Keep your fingers out of the way when you cut as well. Oh, HNS. Nobody needs to take their finger off with their sharp secateurs. Okay. And the other thing I do is I'll always tidy up the crown a little bit, because it just reduces the chance of rot. Okay, we've got one. We've got eyes, got a neck. So far, so good. Okie dokie. Here we go. Sometimes when they're planted really close together, you'll see that the tuber will actually change shape as it grows around something else. What that's doing is because tubers start as just the roots and then they expand. So if your roots are really tangled, then you can end up with a real mess of tubers, at the other end of the season. Okay.
Do you need to treat the cut areas at this time?
Okay, I don't, but you can, and I have done in the past. I find that if it's a normal year and my tubers are looking really healthy, it's not something I bother with, it's not something we've really had problems with. If you have rot in your clump, or it's been particularly wet, you might like to put something over the cuts just to help prevent that spreading any further. I've seen people use cinnamon. I don't use cinnamon. I use dusting sulphur, which you can get at Bunnings. It comes in a little tub, and it smells horrendous, but it works really well. I don't know what cinnamon costs if you need to buy it in kilos, but the dusting sulphur is very affordable. Okay. Who don't I like the look of?
Can we have a close-up view of an eye, please?
With an eye. Okay, this one they're protruding quite a little bit.
Come over here to the...
Come into the light. So you can see here these little raised bumps. They're all about to sprout into eyes. This one has a lot of eyes. And that's another one there. They can be really hard to see until they're actually changing colour. So they'll usually look white, green or purple. So you can see on this one, they've gone purple. This one's white. I hope that helps. It can be really hard. I think this is probably the first year when dividing that I felt really confident. And what I'll do, what I'm working on is for our grow guides that are on our website, I'll put up some more photos of tubers because it can be hard to see in the video. I think it's easier in photos. I'll put up some photos of sort of a like, where's Wally, spot the tuber eye. So you can see the photo and then I'll circle the eye for you in another photo so you can test if what you think is an eye is an eye.
Got another one. Why not cinnamon?
Why not cinnamon? Again, I don't know what it costs on a big scale, and if I am doing sulphur and dusting all of the tubers, we grow 1,500 plants, so potentially that's upwards of 4,500 tubers, and even a little bit of a product over that many tubers ends up being a lot. And I just know that the dusting sulphur, on a commercial scale as well, I know the dusting sulphur works, and I'm not sure about the cinnamon. But if you want to try cinnamon, like I've heard really good things. And obviously it's in most people's kitchen cupboards, so that can be really handy. Any more questions? Okay. Here we go. I really want to get that bit off. I'm really going to take that out. Okay, so again, the tubers that I'm going to prioritise are the ones that I think are going to be most viable. And occasionally I'm going to sacrifice other tubers. I'm going to sacrifice other tubers to make that happen. I'm pretty confident that this and this are mother tubers. So if I damage them, oh well, and I might even try and remove them. I tend to find that twisting mother tubers is a good way to go about it, but these ones are in. Oh. Yep. So we can just twist it and it'll twist through the neck and then it can come off. Which will just give me more space to work on the bits of this clump that I actually want to save. There we go. And that can be an easy alternative if the mother tuber is hard to get to. I washed this. This is a problem with overcrowded clumps. When you wash them, you can still end up with stuff in the middle. And our clumps generally, I don't know if this is because we have clay soil or what, but ours typically look something like this. So they're quite ball shaped. They don't usually sprawl out, but they do stay quite small, which I like because again, small tubers will get you the same plant. And what I like about them is they take up less space and you can dig a much smaller hole. So that makes it really easy at planting time. Oh, it's sprouting as well. You can see it coming through the dirt. We don't typically wash our clumps because they can store without any medium for months at a time. And what I found is that the soil left on them works really well to keep them happy and healthy in that time. Whereas once they're washed, a few years ago it got really wet in May and we lost half of our tubers to rot before we had a chance to dig them up. And what happened then, that was the year that I used the sulphur, but because I'd washed them to get all of that icky wet mud off, they just didn't store as well generally. So I don't know if it's because it was already wet and they already weren't as happy, or if it was because they were washed, but I just find we have much better luck and we don't have to deal with, oh, I've ruined it. That happens. Sometimes you're chopped through the neck. I would never keep this tuber. Some people would. They think it might grow. There's enough neck there. I'm not going to.
How long can you store tubers for?
You don't want to miss a season, would be my advice. So from when you dig them up, we did it in May this year because I didn't know if it was going to be wet. But yeah, I planted out as late as January, I think, and they were still okay. And I'm sure most of you follow Florally seasonal flowers, and Florally all of her dahlias. But this is what I mean, they get so tangled. Just trying to tease them apart, that I might have more casualties here. She did a post earlier this year where she showed some tubers that they'd found that hadn't been sold the year prior but had been packed for sale, and they all still looked like very viable tubers. So if you know, not all is lost, but not everything is going to make it through the entire period.
Got two for you.
Yep.
Just in case sulphur powder gets in the eyes while curing the cut part, does it affect the growing eyes?
Not in my experience, but I honestly don't know enough about that to tell you for sure one way or the other, but I've not had any dramas with it. You potentially wouldn't want to, I know from roses, you don't want to put lime sulphur on any new foliage, so potentially it could be damaging, but if you're dividing, it depends when you're dividing.
The other one is sulphur same as lime and sulphur, or am I off track?
I don't think so, because
Got to add lime added. I assume lime and sulphur is a rose product, like you just said.
No, so lime and sulphur is like a spray that you put on things to stop bacteria. So like with roses, people spray. We don't spray, but people spray to stop the black spot that comes. So you spray before you get the leaves, and then that prevents the black spot returning. I think it's different only because when you do a soil additive, if you're changing your pH, lime goes one way, sulphur goes the other. So I think they're an added together product, but you can just buy dusting sulphur, powdered sulphur. We have the container somewhere, but it's lost its label, so it's not going to be helpful to you. Oh, it's just sitting over there if you want to grab it on.
Yeah, once you're back to...
Sorry, okay. Just trying to make my cameraman do everything all at once. Okay, I'm going to make this easier to cut through. Okay, all of a sudden, like, we're getting better, we're getting somewhere. This clump is now looking much more like the first clump. I think we'll get a few more tubers out of this. I was going to say I won't be greedy and over-divide it, but I might change my mind on that one. So here we go. I always find it helpful to go in half first. Again, through the stem, you can use the stem to help you get a bit of leverage to get in there. And I'm actually going to use my chisel to get the last little bit away, if I can. Okay. It's really just about taking your time, making a plan, going in steps, and remembering it's your plan. If you get halfway through and you don't think it's working, you can change your plan. I also always have an agreement with myself. I'm usually dividing at night time after the farm work has been done, and that means that sometimes I can be a little bit tired. So the agreement that I have with myself is that if I completely stuff up one clump, I stop and I take a break and I come back to it at a later time, because the worst thing you can do is get really upset and then make rash decisions on your next clump. So go through there. So you can cut through. A little bit of a skim on a neck is not a problem, because again, the difference here. This is a problem. We've really gouged into this one. This, not a problem. We're still very intact, and we still have really good connection with our crown. If I was being really neat, I would chop that through there to remove that bit of the stem, and then it's just a nice neat tuber. Do you want to check questions? Or can you go?
No, I don't need questions. You're okay at the moment.
Okay. Okay, then we've got this one. I'm only going to do this into two. Okay. You don't have to divide down into every tuber. Like I said, not every tuber is going to have an eye, but the ones that are really going to test you is if you have a favourite clump and it has two eyes very close to each other and two tubers These are always the hardest because if the two eyes are more on one tuber, but you know that maybe you could make that into two tubers and it's one that you really want a lot of, it is really hard to just put the snips down and say to yourself, one is better than none. Because if you get it wrong, you can end up with no tubers. So sometimes less is more and just know when to step away. When you go out to plant, you can always divide again if you think you can make that cut. But don't think that you have to make every single tuber look like what you see in the tuber dividing videos or in the tuber anatomy videos. Okay, getting rid of more tails. The other reason to get rid of tails is because a nice clean cut, once it goes back in the ground, is less likely to get infected. And if you leave it in with the long tail when you plant, you can end up with a broken tail, which again can let in infection and disease. So that's a good reason to remove them. Okay, this is another mother tuber. You can see that really rough, coarse texture from the lenticels. And we have another pup here, which is broken. So we'll get that one out. Okay, the other good reason to do it this way is it leaves the crown intact. It just breaks through the neck. And that means that we're just leaving everything else alone.
Necks are really the lifeline, really. If you damage the neck, no eyes. Yeah?
Yep. And you can... I would never sell a tuber with a damaged neck because I don't want to there's no point. I don't want to give anyone a bad experience. But if it's your home garden and you break a neck and you want to throw it in the box and see what happens, because some tubers also are really long and skinny. Oh, I put the bad one in the good pile. Like, at what point of this is a broken neck or is the body? And I mean, I would say about here. But potentially, if I break this here, there's maybe enough left here that we're going to get a bit of action and it's going to sprout. So I would be tempted to keep it for myself if it was a variety that was hard to find. So you can have a box of odd jobs that you just keep everything together and you go through later when you're planting if you've got extra space and decide you're going to see what's sprouted. Like, that's totally fine. You don't have to throw out things just because you think maybe you couldn't see what was going on with it.
When you're removing a pup, do you also remove the tuber it's attached to?
No, just the pup. Just the pup. I don't have any... Where was the one? So if I hadn't just completely ruined this mother tuber... Oh, I'll show you this one. It's a bit easier to see. Assuming this wasn't a mother tuber and I hadn't just completely mutilated it, if I were wanting to just trim it down, I would take off the pups and I would just remove them like so. Just pretending that they're roots, and you would end up with a slightly ugly but completely serviceable tuber.
If the neck's a little bit flimsy, can it still grow?
Yes. Yep. Some varieties have the worst necks and they are so hard to divide because you're terrified the entire time that you're going to snap that neck. Champs-Élysées, nightmare. It's probably why we don't see a whole lot of it. But yeah, they can have long, thin necks. Occasionally what will happen on a tuber that does have a very long, thin neck or that is very long and thin is that the neck will actually just dry out. And then that is just as bad as breaking the neck because it doesn't allow that transfer of nutrients from the body to the eye. So that's another thing to watch out for in those very skinny tubers. If you have something that looks like that and you don't know for sure that it's going to be okay, what you can do is divide the clump into quarters or leave a few tubers connected to that one piece, and that's just going to increase your odds of survival. Okay, we're down to our last bit. So he's still got, this is a monster, he's still got 2 stems left. So we could divide down here through the middle if we wanted to, but I think looking at it, they're still very much one clump. So I'll try, so I won't do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and divide this one and then deal with this bit afterwards. So we have a very thick piece now to try and get through. This is a situation where maybe you would consider moving towards your loppers, and I will, because why not? Sometimes I do just muscle through it. I'm not gonna lie. I also didn't disinfect my snips, so these are all definitely staying on the farm. Okay. Here we go. Loppers. Loppers are just big secateurs. Which, ooh, they're even gonna struggle. Here we go. They are gonna struggle. Okay, we're going in. This is a much bigger tuber, much bigger clump that I'm used to dealing with. When you leave them for a few years, they really can get out of control. All right, you know what? Back on the syntax. Okay. We've done our big first cut. We'll go through here. And this is another situation to be aware of. What you'll start to see the more clumps you look at is that sometimes tubers have very obvious connections and crowns. So this tuber, again, this is a neck. I wouldn't be super worried about this one. It's just got a little bit of superficial damage, but I think it's still connected pretty well. But you can see that this one has a very obvious crown that belongs to it. And then the one beneath it has a very obvious crown that belongs to it. So if you're dividing tubers and you can't see eyes yet, these are little context clues that you can look for to help you know where to cut as well. So if I was cutting this one, I would really be aiming to get down this line here, which is complicated in this instance because we have all this sitting right there behind it. So I might try and divide that bit away a little bit more and then come back to those. Okay, here we go. The big bit again. Okay. Here we go. Okay, so we've got rid of the big hunk that was sitting behind the others more or less. So now I'm going to go for a little bit of a clean up to get rid of just some of the flesh. The flesh, it sounds creepy. To get rid of some of the excess tuber that we don't need. Being careful all the time that my snips don't slip into part that I actually want. Okay. So now this one, they're falling apart because they're two different clumps. And now it's much easier for me to get in between these two. And now they're separated, so we've got our two tubers. So that's where I thought I was going to go one way and then I stopped, I looked at it and I changed direction. That's something sometimes you just have to try it as well. I've done, how many tubers would I have divided now? I've divided well over 3,000 clumps. So as you go, you just get more practice at it. You start to see the patterns. And when you have varieties that you grow year on year on year, that can be really handy as well because you start to know what's easy and what's not easy. For example, I know if I pick up a Bracken Sarah, I'm going to have a really good time. Bracken Sarah is usually a little bit splayed. She has nice firm tubers, nice sturdy necks, and she makes her eyes really apparent. And she has beautiful little crowns. I'll put up a photo. But if I'm picking up, again, Champs-Élysées, nightmare, and Formy Cardinal, I think, can be a little bit tricky as well. Question?
My clumps are washed and stored in a mix of potting mix and sawdust.
Great.
How do you start to inspect for eyes when they're covered in it? Brush it off. Just be wary to not knock off new eyes.
What you can do, get a paintbrush, and then so you can pull them out, get a paintbrush, do a little bit of a archaeological dig around and dust them off, and then that'll reveal them to you without putting too much pressure on it. If you leave it for too long, what you'll see as well is that the sprouts will just come straight out the top of the mix and you won't have to worry about it. You'll know they're there. they will let you know. Okay.
I invited your mum too. You must have forgotten. She's here now.
Oh, Mum's here. Hi, Mum. I'm just dividing your Dahlia clump.
And Kerry?
And Kerry. Okay. Now, because this is wet, the visibility is disappearing a little bit. So what I would do, if I ever stop and I'm unsure of where I'm going to keep going, I just stop. And then, like, this is now a size that's really easy to store. So I can just put this away, and then when I dig it out, whenever it's either getting packed up for sale or whether I'm going to plant, I can inspect it again and then make a decision if I'm going to turn that into another plant or not. But yeah, I try not to take too many risks with them when I have no idea what I'm actually cutting into. And this one's a bit the same. If I was feeling adventurous, I would probably cut it through here. But yeah, I will, why not? So the context clues that I'm taking from this one is I can see there's an eye here. I believe that that eye is supposed to belong to this tuber, which means this one potentially doesn't have one. But I can see that little mound that is letting me know that there's probably an eye there, which means that in all the rest of this, there's probably another one. So I'm safe to make that cut. And if I'm not, and there is no eye on the other one, I haven't lost anything because I've preserved that one eye that I came for. And I would just store this one anyway and then check on it again a bit later. Right, clump, done.
I've heard people talking about waking up their tubers. What does that involve? Am I better off letting them sleep and not interfere?
It depends what you want to do with them. So tubers will wake up. Sorry, I'll just sit down again. Tubers wake up when they're held at a temperature that is consistently above 16 degrees. When I say that, what I mean is the soil temperature that is surrounding the tubers. It can take about 5 weeks for them to wake up. And when we say wake up, what we really mean is that those eyes are sprouting and that you can see that they're leaving their dormancy. People will often do it early if they're planning on taking tuber cuttings. So that's when you let it grow, usually on a hotbed. We have some set up right now. Let the sprout grow and then you cut it off, you put it into some soil and you let it take root, and then that will grow into a whole plant, and then your tuber will put out new cuttings. So that is one reason why you might wake them up early. Another reason you might wake them up early is if you just want flowers earlier. So you might put them into little pots, put them somewhere really warm and then let them wake up, and then plant them out when it is time to plant out. So you can get a little bit of a jump start on the season. If you aren't planning on doing any of that and you just want to plant out your tubers when it's time, you can just leave them alone. You don't want to wake them up too early if they're just going to sit in storage for a really long time, because they can sprout, and some varieties are not as robust as others, and the shoots can dry out and it can harm the tuber, and then they may or may not come back from that. Yep, question.
As a beginner, would you suggest cutting a newly dug clump into quarters, store, then divide?
Yep. If you need the space, half is probably even better again. But yeah, half or quarters, I wouldn't go any further than that. But the other thing is if you're really fast and you dig up your clump and you wash it off, sometimes you can actually catch the eyes before they suck themselves back into the tubers for dormancy. The catch there is that not every eye that is apparent before dormancy will come back afterwards. So to be safe, you could use that as a guide to help you cut into quarters so you're not making any silly sacrifices, and then store them and then look again when you're more certain.
Can you plant tubers without the eye if in a warmer climate?
You can, as in, I'm assuming you mean before the eye has woken up. Yes, you absolutely can, and you can also plant a tuber if you can't see the eye at all and you're not sure if it's got one. The difference is that if there is no eye at all, that plant is not going to grow. But if it just has a hidden eye or one that you can't see, you can plant it while it's dormant, and assuming it's warm, it's going to grow. That answers that question. Yeah, or any more questions? I think we can see the carnage that I've made from this clump. And this is what it's probably going to look like when you're dividing your clumps, is you're always going to end up with a pile of bits that are going to end up in your compost. But hopefully the pile that you end up with of things that you can plant is going to be just as big, if not bigger. So don't be fooled by people who say that they managed to get 1,000,000 tubers and no casualties. I think I've seen one flower farmer claim that she's done it once and she divides thousands of tubers every year. So don't beat yourself up. Just remember to breathe through it. It'll be okay. And just remember, as long as you get one viable tuber, you're no worse off, but you've gained heaps more experience on how not to divide that one. Yeah, any other questions? No more
Not at
questions?
the moment.
If you have any other questions, you can feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. I'm pretty approachable and happy to chat dahlias. That's at QC Flower Farm, if that's helpful. Otherwise, I am going to put this video up on YouTube, I think, and it will probably live on Facebook for a little while as well. No more questions?
No, just thank yous.
Okay, I hope that was really helpful, and if it was, let me know if there's anything else that you'd like us to cover, and we'll either put it into a grow guide or try and do a video or a workshop, depending on what works best. Okay, thank you, bye.